Hey everybody, welcome back to the family channel. I hope you guys are having a fantastically awesome day so far. As you can see, I'm flying solo for this video, and that is because Kat is super busy with work at the moment and she wants to go for a swim this evening. So she said, can you film and I'll finish off and then we can go for a swim. And I was like, yes, that is fine, because it is absolutely roasting at the moment. It is so hot. I've got the windows closed again. You might hear a hum in the background. I've got the fan on full pelt. Our car's AC actually packed up and we went and got it refilled today, so that's awesome. We've at least got AC back in the car, but the house is like a sauna. It is really, really hot. Anyway, today we are reacting to USS No-Go, America's invincible concrete battleship. And this is from, of course, the Fat Electrician, whose channel is freaking awesome. If you guys have never heard of the Fat Electrician, you've been living under a rock or something, I suggest checking out his channel. It'll be linked in the description. He is amazing. I love the way he tells the story. It's so to the point. And if he was a history teacher, I probably would have paid a lot more attention at school, even though he does drop the F-bomb every now and then. Before we get into the video though, if you haven't done so already, please make sure you hit the subscribe button, and if you're feeling extra frisky, you may as well give the video a like as well. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's check out America's invincible concrete battleship.
So why on earth did America turn an island into a giant gun? Well, our story begins in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. Why is America at war with Spain? To be honest, I'm kind of blanking out on that right now. Statistically, it's probably because they messed with our boats, so let's go ahead and double check that together. How did the Spanish-American War start? The USS Maine mysteriously exploded in a Cuban harbor, believed to be the Spanish. See, I was right. It's always the boats every single time. Honestly, at this point, Jordan Peterson needs to go back and rewrite his book, because he actually wrote a book called 12 Rules for Life, and the fact that not fucking with America's boats wasn't rule number one seems like an oversight on his part. Anyways, so America sends a bunch of boats into Manila Bay to fight.
You see what I mean? If he was teaching you history at school, wouldn't you have enjoyed it? Now, I know the language offends some people. Some people are like, oh, he swears. I think it's brilliant. I think it adds to it, because he doesn't do it in a derogatory way. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've got a foul mouth, but I don't intend to. Like, sometimes it's just the way I speak. Now, I worked in a trade and that's how we all spoke, and it's a hard habit to drop, but the way he does it is awesome.
Rule number one seems like an oversight on his part. Anyways, so America sends a bunch of boats into Manila Bay to fight the Spanish. While they're headed into Manila Bay, they pass this tiny little rock island called El Fraile, and on El Fraile there was a bunch of Spanish artillery that basically tried to ambush all the American ships. It didn't really work, but it was a super good idea. Fast forward, America wins the Spanish-American War, takes control of the Philippines. So now with America in charge, they decided that they wanted to be able to defend Manila Bay, and they remembered back to how the Spanish almost had a successful ambush by putting artillery on El Fraile. And that's when the Americans in charge said, hey, hear me out. Instead of putting artillery on El Fraile, what if we turned El Fraile into artillery? So the engineer was like, okay, here's the plan. We're going to level the entire island perfectly tabletop flat, and then we're going to build an enormous concrete bunker on top of it with two battleship turrets, each of which having two 12-inch guns on them. So the engineer in charge draws the blueprints up, sends those off to the War Department to get approval, at which point the War Department is like, hold on, let me get this straight. You want to level an entire island, build an enormous concrete bunker on top of it, and then you want to equip it with two battleship turrets, each of which has two 12-inch guns that we're going to have to manufacture in Watervliet Arsenal.
I think I know what's coming, but the way he builds up
in New York and ship them all the way to the Philippines. To which the engineer is like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. And the War Department is like,
pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
because we're going to do 14-inch guns, each of which is going to be 1,600-pound shells. If somebody tries to sneak into Manila Bay, we're literally going to start shooting cars at them till they go away.
I'm just going to turn the fan off because it's actually distracting me. Just yank the plug out. It's a bit better.
So they start construction in 1909, and it takes them 5 years to finish. And what they end up with is Fort Drum. Its concrete is anywhere between 25 and 36 feet thick. The top deck is completely reinforced with steel between 25 and 35 years to finish. And what they end up with is Fort Drum. Its concrete is anywhere between 25 and 36 feet thick. The top...
I thought that's what he said, but I thought I misheard it. 25 and 30... What did he say? 25 and 36 feet deep.
Is Fort Drum. Its concrete is anywhere between 25 and 36 feet thick. The top deck is completely reinforced with steel, essentially making the entire fortress completely impervious to any weapon that exists at this point in time. Then the guns on top are 14-inch M1909 guns in a dual turret that was specially manufactured just for Fort Drum, and it is the only place they were ever used. This turret has armor that is 18 inches thick, virtually making that impervious too. Then, just in case being able to shoot cars at people you don't note, like, while being inside of a bunker that makes you impervious to retaliation isn't enough, it also has 4 6-inch guns and 2 3-inch anti-aircraft guns. And inside the bunker, they have 6 months worth of food, their own power plant, and a distillery so that they can make their own clean drinking water. Basically, it's the world's best doomsday bunker. So it's completely done. It's like 1914. America has built this incredible weapon, and now, in true American fashion, we're not really going to use it until it's borderline obsolete, and then we're going to give it away to somebody else. So kind of fast forward through the next 20 years. I mean, there's always Army guys stationed there and on hand in case anything happens, but nothing ever does. It's kind of like being stationed on a naval vessel, and because of that, the Army guys that serve there give it the nickname the USS No-Go, considering it never fucking goes anywhere. Then, of course, during the same time period,
I love the way he said it. It never fucking goes anywhere. Excuse my language.
The USS No-Go, considering it never fucking goes anywhere. Then, of course, during that same time period, World War I happens. After World War I, America downsizes their military considerably. Then the Great Depression happens, and because of that, pretty much no upgrades or maintenance gets done to Fort Drum during that entire time. So for its first 2 decades, it receives pretty much no upgrades. It's already becoming obsolete. Then in 1934, the US government comes out and says, over the course of the next 10 years, between 1934 and 1944, America is going to move towards establishing the Philippines as its own sovereign nation. So obviously, they're also going to turn over Fort Drum to the Philippines, and because of that, they have even less motivation to do any upgrades to it, so none get done. Then, during that 10-year time period, World War II kicks off in 1939, but America's not getting involved. We're minding our own business, and by minding our own business, I mean we're basically funding the entire thing through Lend-Lease, but, you know, we're not involved. Then Pearl Harbor happens in 1941, aka somebody fucks with our boats, now we're going to war. Less than 10 hours after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese show up in the Philippines, they invade, the American forces are not ready, and they all get driven down to the Bataan Peninsula, which as you can see is also at the mouth of Manila Bay with Corregidor and Fort Drum. For like the next 5 months, while American and Filipino forces duke it out with the Japanese on the peninsula, Fort Drum is pretty much shooting at any Japanese vessel that gets anywhere near it. The Japanese vessels are returning fire at Fort Drum, they're launching air raids, trying to bomb Fort Drum, none of which is effective at all. Also during this time, the Marines and soldiers stationed at Fort...
I know it says it's like invincible. I'd still like to see what the impact does. Does it just stay flat or does it blow out some of it? Do you know what I mean? It doesn't, obviously doesn't just stay pristine. There's got to be some sort of damage. What do they call it? You know what I mean? Like, it's on the surface.
Drum, rip all the buildings on top of it off, throw that shit in the ocean. They also tear down the 60-foot search tower. The buildings aren't effective at all. Also during this time, the Marines and soldiers stationed at Fort Drum rip all the buildings on top of it off, throw that shit in the ocean. They also tear down the 60-foot search tower and get rid of that as well. That way, the massive turrets can do a full 360 and be able to shoot in any direction. Then, April 9th, 1942, Bataan falls, and the only thing left is Corregidor, Fort Drum, and 2 other small coastal forts. For weeks after this, the Japanese shell both Corregidor and Fort Drum with naval gunfire, as well as conduct bombing runs. Fort Drum is pretty much completely impervious to all of it, which infuriates the Japanese. Corregidor, on the other hand, is nowhere near as fortified, and they are hurting bad. Because of this, the majority of Corregidor's defenses have been completely destroyed, and the only thing defending Corregidor now is Fort Drum. On May 5th, 1942, the Japanese would launch an amphibious attack on Corregidor. Fort Drum would land direct hits on 2 Japanese landing craft, destroying them completely, infuriating the Japanese even further. Despite that, it wasn't enough, and Corregidor would fall on May 5th. The concrete battleship and the 240 men manning it are now the last holdouts in the Philippines against the Japanese, and it is pissing the Japanese off. And in immediate retaliation for them taking out several of the Japanese landing crafts at Corregidor, they begin launching air raids against Fort Drum, and they are, again, completely ineffective. During those air raids, some of the Marines manning the anti-aircraft guns would manage to shoot down a Japanese bomber, only serving to piss them off even more. At this point, General Wainwright...
Can you imagine how frustrating it is? They've taken everything. You've got this one little island and you just can't beat it. It's mental. That's awesome, though. The engineering is insane.
Left in charge of American forces in the Philippines after General MacArthur abandoned his men and fled to Australia, issued the order that all American forces were to surrender on May 6th at noon. At this point, according to the legend, the entire crew of the USS No-Go, aka Fort Drum, gets together and they have a conversation and talk about whether or not they want to even follow this order because they think they can go toe-to-toe with the Japanese forever inside of this concrete monstrosity. Unfortunately, they would come to the realization that this decision had already been made for them because at some point, the distillery that purifies their drinking water became damaged, and without US ships being able to bring them water, they weren't going to be able to hold out.
Oh,
so, given that they have to
flippin'
surrender tomorrow, but they still want to fight, they decide, hey, let's get rid of all this ammunition that we have. And they fire at the Japanese ships non-stop as fast as they can for like the next 18 hours straight. And apparently, according to legend, it got so hot inside of Fort Drum that it was able to increase the muzzle velocity of the guns, and they were able to score more hits on Japanese ships that thought that they were out of range.
Holy
and they continued to
smokes.
fire non-stop until 11:59 on May 6th, when they were finally forced to surrender at noon. They then proceeded to sabotage the guns, the power plant, and flood as much of Fort Drum as they possibly could, making it useless to the Imperial Japanese. At the time of their capture, all 240 men were still alive, and only 5 of them had been injured after weeks of combat. They would then be taken as prisoners by the Imperial Japanese, where the majority of the men would be tortured, starved, and worked to death, and it is believed that less than 30 of the men at Fort Drum returned home after World War II. Fast forward 3 years,
They made it through all of that. That is insane. And then tortured and worked to death. What a way to go.
30 of the men at Fort Drum returned home after World War II. Fast forward 3 years, 1945, America is now winning the war in the Pacific, and they have returned to the Philippines to reclaim them from the Japanese. At this point, Fort Drum is believed to be completely inoperable, and nobody has seen anything that would suggest otherwise until in April of 1945, an American PT boat would get a little bit too close, and Japanese machine guns would begin firing upon him from Fort Drum. This intel gets sent up the chain of command, at which point nobody really knows what's happening. Maybe they're trying to restore Fort Drum and use it. Maybe there's just a bunch of Japanese soldiers that are being barracked there. Who knows? Either way, Uncle Sam says, you know what? That's mine, and I'm going to need it back. So at first, they try to bomb it with planes. Obviously, that's not going to work. It didn't work when the Japanese did it. I don't know why they thought it would work now. Then they send out a cruiser to shell it with naval gunfire. Again, obviously, it doesn't work. At which point, shit proceeds to get out of hand pretty quick. Basically, the chain of command didn't really know what to do, so they're like, hear me out. Let's just give the blueprints for Fort Drum to an entire platoon of Army combat engineers, aka the demolition men, and tell them to get rid of it, and the sooner they do, the sooner we all get to go home. So the engineers take the blueprints, they go come up with a plan. I don't really know how long it took them. I presume about the same amount of time it takes them to smoke a cigarette. That's probably not a coincidence. They come back to the chain of command. They're like, okay, here's what I need. All right, we're gonna need an entire company of infantry, 1,000 gallons of gasoline, 2,000 gallons of diesel, all the incendiary and white phosphorus grenades you can find, a 30-minute fuse, and a camera guy, because you're going to want to get this shit on video. And apparently the chain of command is like, okay.
Can you imagine we all, like, they had phones like we have now, the stuff that would have been filmed, but like the way he's like a camera guy.
The incendiary and white phosphorus grenades you can find, a 30-minute fuse, and a camera guy, because you're going to want to get this shit on video. And apparently the chain of command is like, okay, so a couple days later, April, Friday the 13th, 1945, the U.S. forces launch Drum D-Day. 2 American ships pull up, drop landing ramps onto Fort Drum, and all the infantry and combat engineers run out to secure the deck, at which point they start taking fire from one of the 6-inch guns. They all return fire, including the ships, until that 6-inch gun stops. Then they secure the entire deck, and the combat engineers get to work. The engineers then run a hose up onto Fort Drum and begin pumping 3,000 gallons of gasoline and diesel into the air vent of Fort Drum. They then proceed to put 600 pounds of TNT, a bunch of white phosphorus, and incendiary grenades on top of it, rig it up to a 30-minute fuse, light it, and fucking run. They hop back in the boats, they sailed a safe distance away, and then they waited, and they watched. And this is what they saw. That explosion was so powerful that it shot the 2,000-pound hatch on top of Fort Drum 300 feet into the air.
Was that the hatch?
And if you watch the 2,000-pound...
Sorry.
And this is what they saw.
Oh, sure, but it was.
That explosion was so powerful that it shot the 2,000-pound hatch on top of Fort Drum 300 feet into the air. And if you watch the video a little bit closer, you can actually see the hatch punch through the top of the mushroom cloud before falling back into the smoke.
There it is.
The diesel fire inside of Fort Drum then proceeded to burn for 5 days straight, officially putting an end to any hopes of ever restoring it to its former glory. In the coming months, American and Filipino forces would reclaim the Philippines, Japan would end up surrendering, World War II would come to a close, and the next year, on July 4th, 1946, the Philippines would gain their independence, becoming their own sovereign nation, and thus taking control of Fort Drum, where it still sits at the mouth of the Bay, pretty much in the same condition that America left it, serving as a powerful reminder to not mess with America's boats, or anything that even kinda sorta looks like a boat for that matter, okay? Just don't. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang, out.
I love it. I love it. I've asked Kat to get me a couple of those shirts for my birthday. My birthday's coming up in August, so I really want a couple of those shirts. I've never heard of that. It's amazing. I don't know whether you can hear the music. That's the village announcement thing. Sorry about that. But I've never heard of that. I'd love to go and see it. Now, they say it's completely ruined inside. I wonder if you could still go in and see. Because those things, those cannons or guns on turrets were freaking insane. And the fact that they knocked the watchtower or whatever it was called down just so they could spin them 360 is mental. It's a bit... It sucks that after like how many years of staying there, weeks or months, that 250 men survived basically, and then only to be surrendered, and then yeah, only 30 of them survived, which sucks balls basically. I don't really want to swear. I'm trying my hardest not to swear on this channel and on most channels, to be honest with you, but I do have a potty mouth and sometimes I catch myself. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. If you've got any more recommendations, please feel free to email us, and yeah, I will see you, or we will see you in the next video. Bye.